Navigating the new decision-making tool for alternate assessment. This is a crosswalk between the new decision-making tool and the participation criteria form. This is being presented by Helen Brophy and Dee Dee House of State Support Team 8. Today's learning objectives. Participants will become familiar with the new decision-making tool and how to use it, and understand how the decision-making tool and the participation criteria form work together, and how we make decisions about students that should be on alternate assessment. So where do we start when determining alternate assessment participation? So we start with Ohio's alternate assessment participation decision-making tool. Okay, we have part A, determining initial eligibility. So number one, you start off with, does the student have an IEP? And this may sound just a little like, I'm sure that a student has an IEP, but it has been said that some students have been placed on alternate assessment without an IEP or with a 504. And that is not acceptable. I think most of our audience understands that. Then we go over, does the student have a current IEP? And if we answer yes, then we proceed to the next statement. Let's look at the participation criteria form.
We start with the participation criteria form that has 3 questions which must be answered with yes or no. The first is, does the student have a significant cognitive disability? This is a reminder that the alternate assessment was really designed for only those students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. What information do we need to consider to be able to confidently answer yes? That leads us back to the new decision-making tool. As Helen said, we first make sure that the student's on an IEP. Secondly, we're going to look at their eligibility category. If the student falls into one of the categories on the left, specific learning disability or a speech and language impairment, you would stop and proceed no further because the student does not qualify. The reason for this is because these disability categories do not involve or include a cognitive disability. For students who fall into categories on the right, autism, deafblindness, an intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, or traumatic brain injury, you would proceed to Part B. You may also be proceeding to Part B for students who might fall in the center categories of deafblindness or hearing impairment, emotional disturbance, orthopedic impairment, other health impairment, or visual impairment. Although you will proceed to the next section, you will do so with caution, as you can see here, because very rarely will a student with one of these disabilities qualify for alternate assessment. Again, the reason being that it usually does not involve a significant cognitive disability. So we move on to Part B, and we will look at several domains. First, the conceptual domain. You will choose the column that best describes the student in this category. You can only choose one column, and you will notice the bold ands that are listed in each. It has to be everything in that column. It can't be one and not some of the subsequent descriptions. If you are torn between 2 columns, then you presume competence and you will select the column to the left or the lower number. Next, we look at the social domain and follow the same steps. Again, choosing the column that best describes the student's level of functioning. Finally, we look at the practical domain and again, follow the same steps. You have to complete all 3 of the domains, and the student has to fall in that column 4 for all 3 adaptive skill domains that we just looked at. If the student fell into one of the other columns for any of the three, you must stop and the student does not qualify for the alternate assessment. If the student did fall into column 4 for all of those three domains, then you proceed to part C. Since we've answered yes, and the student did fall into column 4 for those, we can be confident that we've answered yes to that first question on the participation criteria form of whether or not the student has a significant cognitive disability. Now we're going to look at question 2, which asks us whether or not the student is utilizing the extended standards because he or she has a significantly modified curriculum. To determine that, we go back to the new decision-making tool and look at part C. Again, we are going to rank the student in one of the 4 columns based on the description that best fits the student's daily instruction, and that would be the curriculum, the instruction, and the assessment. In this section of the decision-making tool, students can fall either into column 3 or column 4. Again, this brings us back to that question that we can confidently answer yes, that the student is utilizing the extended standards and is on a significantly modified curriculum. That takes us to question 3, where we have to answer whether or not the student requires extensive, direct, individualized instruction in order to make progress in the curriculum. So now we, once again, go back to the new decision-making tool, and we're going to look at the accommodations and modifications section. You're going to follow those same exact steps, and you are going to rate the student in one of the 4 columns based on the descriptions that most appropriately fit the student's level of functioning and the accommodations or modifications that are outlined for the student in the IEP. Here again, students can fall into columns 3 or 4. Finally, we're going to look at assistive technology and do the exact same thing following the same prompts. Students can fall into columns 3 or 4. And this takes us to the end of our decision-making tool. If the student fell into columns 3 or 4 only, and there were no 1s and 2s, then you proceed to part D. However, if the student was in column 1 or 2 for any of those, either the curriculum, accommodations and modifications, or assistive technology, then you stop and the student is not eligible. If they did land in columns 3 and 4, again, we can confidently answer yes to that third and final question on the participation criteria form.
Okay, part D is additional considerations. The decision to participate in alternate assessment is made after reviewing the entire decision-making tool and the collection of evidence used in parts A, B, and C, which were just discussed. The decision to participate in alternate assessment is not made based solely on the following considerations: not disability category or the educational environment or instructional setting, the student's reading level being below grade level, expected poor performance on the general ed assessment, administration decision or anticipated impact of student scores on the accountability system, any anticipated disruptive behavior or emotional duress when taking general assessments, poor or extended absences, and the fact that a student is an English language learner or has other social, cultural, or economic differences does not qualify them for an alternate assessment. Need for accommodations such as assistive technology or an augmentative or alternative communication form does not put the student automatically to participate in the general assessment. So based on the review of evidence in parts A, B, and C, and ensuring the decision is not based solely on the considerations that I just went through, does the student meet all criteria for participation in alternate assessment? If you can answer yes, you check that the student meets all criteria, and you will have the district rep sign, the intervention specialist, gen ed teacher, and parent and guardian sign and date the form. Now, if they do not, you would mark no and do the following. Okay, evidence for the decision to participate in alternate assessment is what I basically just went through previously, is not based on the 14 items here. So now you will sign both documents, which is the new decision-making tool and the participation criteria. You can attach to the IEP the participation criteria or place in the student's file. So once again, you see we will have signatures and dates. So now I want to thank you for being with us on this crosswalk, but also let you know that we plan a deeper dive on January 14th, a live Zoom, for looking into the process and the existing disproportionality in alternate assessment. This will be looking at district data and decision-making on assessments. The registration link is below, and you can also find that on our SST8 webpage under professional development.